Dear, dear honourable guests, friends, colleagues and kindred spirits, welcome to our Hidden Treasure seminar series co-organised by Monash University and the Asia Pacific branch of the Ibn Arabi Society. My name is Devaki, and together with my friend Adwan, we will serve as the host of today's seminar on Ibn Arabi, one of the most influential mystics in world history. Our speaker today will be Dr. Yousef Casewit, who is kindly joining us from the University of Chicago in the United States. Born in Egypt and raised in Morocco, Dr. Casewit is fluent in Arabic, French, and Spanish. He widely travelled throughout the Islamic world and has studied with Muslim scholars in Morocco, Syria, and Mauritania. He earned his MA, MPhil and PhD in Islamic Studies at Yale University, prior to joining the University of Chicago Divinity School as Assistant Professor of Quranic Studies. Dr. Casewit was a Humanities Research Fellow at New York University, Abu Dhabi, and an Assistant Professor of Arabic Intellectual Heritage and Culture at the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. The impressive list of Dr. Casewit's publications entails an in-depth studies of various 12th century scholars who made an impact on Ibn Arabi, such as Barajan and Al-Ghazali, as well as 13th century mystics and intellectuals who were associates or followers of Ibn Arabi, such as Ibn Sabin and Al-Shustari and Al-Tilimsani. Dr. Casewit's first book was a critical edition of Ibn Barajan's Quranic commentary, and his second book, The Mystics of Al-Andalus, Ibn Barajan and Islamic Thought in the 12th Century, was the winner of the Iran World Book Award of the year 2019. His next book is forthcoming by the NYU Press and is titled In the Names of God, A Mystical Theology of Divine Names in the Quran by Afif al-Din al-Tilimsani, and we are very much looking forward to its publication. Dr. Casewit's talk today is titled The Spirit, the Heart and the Intellect, Sufi Perspective. As usual, after the presentation, we will stop recording and we will have around 20 minutes for a Q&A with Dr. Casewit. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And of course, dear Yousef, and that's now over to you with great anticipation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet everyone virtually. So I'll just jump in. Thank you for the kind invitation. What I'll try to do today is just offer some brief remarks that gives you a sense of how Muslim mystics approach or understand the function, the role, the properties, qualities of the spirit, ar-ruh, the soul, and nafs, the heart, al-qalb. And I'm not going to delve into the historical development of key ideas and hair-splitting or technical differences that one finds among various figures. I'm going to try to give you just a framework to understand how Sufis, Muslim mystics interested in an intensified experience of God in the here below, how they understand and approach this ambiguous term of ar-ruh and al-qalb and nafs. So the human being is comprised of 5 parts, you could say, in the writings of Sufis that I often find myself studying and learning from. You have ar-ruh, the spirit, an-nafs, the soul, al-qalb, the heart, al-aql, the intellect, and of course al-jasad, which is the body. And the body, in relation to these 5 parts or components, is the smallest and the least significant part of the human being. It's the shell that carries or envelops the human being. It's like a, you could think of it as a cage, at least in the beginning of one's spiritual traveling. And the body, you could say, is encompassed by the soul. The soul is encompassed by the spirit, which is larger than it. And each of these, you could think of them when you say heart, spirit, soul. You could think of them as faculties of perception. Sometimes they're used synonymously among authors. The Quran tends to distinguish between them and discusses these terms in different contexts. I think that the the most important place to start would be with the term ar-ruh, the spirit, which consists of, you might say, an essential reality. Like the human being consists of this essential reality and an outward form. And the essential reality is this spirit. It's a subtle, it's latif in the Arabic. It's a divine entity that God created in the human being. Right. This is how it's often understood. And of course, all the language through which I'll talk about these entities, it's all couched in Quranic language, and the self-understanding that Muslims have of their place within the universe and their relation to God and the structure of the cosmos and everything. Without that, it's very difficult to communicate any of these indigenous terms. So the essential reality, you could say, of the human being is this spirit, and it's through this mysterious entity that you are what you are as a human being. When that entity leaves the body, your body is then called a corpse. It's not a body anymore, and it goes from being a jasad in Arabic to being a jutha. And so the intrinsic worth of the human being, the value and the place of privilege that the human being enjoys, the high status that he or she occupies in the cosmos, is by virtue of this ruh, of this spirit. It's by virtue of the spirit that the angels prostrate to human beings in the Quran by God's command. It's by virtue of the spirit that Adam teaches the angels. Adam becomes the teacher of the angels who become his students. He teaches them all the names of God, names of all things. And uh, in the Quran, God subjugates the heavens and the earth, not for the body, which is made of clay, which is a mixture of water and earth, but for the ruh, for the spirit. And God addresses the human being. Uh, that is to say, God addresses the ruh first and foremost, and then the intellect and the heart and so on. But not necessarily, he's not addressing the clay, right? And when he addresses the human being, God is addressing the ruh, right? Ya ayyuhal insan, O human being, you could say it means O ruh, O essential reality of human being. Uh, now, uh, the broadly speaking, the ruh, the spirit, is specific to human beings. Uh, the nafs, the soul, on the other hand, is shared by other creatures, creatures that have a life, that live, and how you define life is somewhat complicated. The theologians will say life is defined by that which breathes, for instance. But then many Sufis will contend and say anything that exists has a type of life at its own level. Ibn Arabi would contend that everything is living because God is the living, and anything that comes to be through the attribute of divine life. So everything in a sense has a nafs, has a soul, but more specific to the theologians, you might say, the animals, living sentient things have a soul, have a nafs, but only the human being has a ruh. The ruh is ascribed, moreover, to God in the Quran and in many prophetic sayings. Uh, just as God, you could say, ascribes his house to himself, like the Kaaba in Mecca is my house. God's, it's Baytullah, it's God's house, and the Ruh is min Ruhi, it's God's Ruh. It's His greatest sign, and God addresses the Ruh in, you could say, in this framework within which I'm speaking. Uh, God addresses it before it was conceived in the womb. First of all, God addresses the ruh in the world of the covenant, the world of Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Often referred to simply as the day of Alastu, when God brings together mankind and uh, asks the human being as a servant and a vicegerent of God on earth to affirm his lordship. Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And then the human being responds, Bala, yes, indeed you are my Lord. So that covenant in pre-eternity precedes bodies. There are has spoken to the Ruh in this day before creation. So after that address or that communion between the Ruh and the human being, or between God and the Ruh, then God addresses that same entity in the world of the seed, what's called Alam al-Dhar, the world of the seed. In other words, um, the journey that each soul or each spirit, excuse me, not soul, each spirit takes from loin to loin, from generation to generation, until the moment of conception. Right, that moment from Adam all the way to your birth date, you could say, or all the way to your date of conception specifically, is the world of the seed for your spirit, right? So the 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 Quran addresses that spirit, that same entity. It's not two. It's the same one that was affirming the day of lordship. God addresses that same one in the world of the seed, and then in the mother's womb, and then as a prepubescent youth who's not religiously accountable, غير مكلف, and then as a child, then as a religiously accountable adult, and then as an elderly, and then at the moment of death, the same ruh is addressed, and then in the grave, which is the interworld between this world and the next, and then on the plane of resurrection, and then in the world of um, uh, divine contentment or divine wrath. And so at each stage of, you could say, transition from house to house or from stage to stage, from world to world, the same you, the same spirit is undergoing changes in form. But it's the same ruh that's carried through these multiple forms at each stage. So the only constant within us as human beings from the Sufi perspective is the ruh. It went from the world of am I not your Lord to the world of the seed to the world of the womb to the world of right now this 3 minute like cycle that we have here in the hair below, and then the world of the grave, then the world of the resurrection, and so on. It's one reality, but many different forms. So the ruh has the ability, the spirit has the ability to undergo, you could say, to take on different forms as it journeys through this cosmic drama. And uh, this ruh, therefore, you could say, as a result of, if you can conceive of this grand narrative, the ruh is not from this world. It's not from the created world. It's not from alam al khalq. It's from the world of, in the Quranic language, the world of the command, directly from the world of be and it is. So there's a distinction that the Quran consistently draws and that Ibn Arabi makes very consistently between the realm of the created world that we're in and the realm of the command. The realm of the command comes, it's you could say on God's side, so it's uncreated. And it's unknown, that realm. And the spirit itself, they're unknown by the intellect, by the body, because the ruh, this spirit, is above them. However, the spirit leaves its marks or its traces in the body, in the soul, in the heart, um, and those we can't deny, right? So you can't smell, taste, or hear or see the spirit or the ruh with your sensory faculties, but you can see its traces. The greatest trace, for instance, one of the most obvious ones from this perspective would be simply consciousness or awareness, or shu'ur, direct perception, direct idrak. And so the just as you could say God's essence in and of himself, the Godhead, the highest ultimate reality is unknown except through its traces, through its names, through its attributes and qualities. Likewise, the very essence of the human being um, cannot be perceived by things beneath it, but can be known through its traces, through its qualities and attributes as it relates to external things. Um, and so this ruh right now where we're sitting, uh, I mean, it is happens to be at this phase that we're in, happens to be conjoined to or attached to the body, the human body, but it doesn't dwell in it spatially. It's not like if one loses a limb, God forbid, that the ruh is somehow diminished. So the body is a nest or a cage or a locus for the spirit, and it, but it doesn't undergo the properties of time and space like this, like the body. Otherwise, as the body ages, the ruh, the spirit itself, would age as well. So if the body becomes ill, the ruh would become ill. But the ruh, the spirit, is not subject to these forces of time and space, because why? As we said, it's from the world of the command. And the body itself is from the world of clay, it's from the world of creation. And so uh, traces of time uh, uh, leave their mark upon the body, right? We the body every 7 years literally regenerates every single cell within it. That's not the case for the ruh is blown into, quote unquote. How does it relate to this body? In Quranic language, it's the insufflation or the inblowing, the nafkha. It's blown into the body. In the Hadith tradition, in the prophetic sayings, it's on the 40th day after conception that the ruh is blown into it. According to later scholars, it's the 120th day, the third month. But it's defined, therefore, uh, as an entity from this realm of the divine command. Fine. Uh, that is to say, it's not from the created realm, so it's not created. It's subtle, it's latif, it's not kathif, it's not gross or dense, and it's rabbani, it's of the Lord, it's a lordly creation, and it 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 has a beginning, right? The beginning of the ruh is when God blew it into Adam, or into the Adamite, or the child of Adam, uh, into the clay like uh, body of Adam, the baked clay, salsalin kal fakhar in the Quranic language. It's just like malleable uh, type of clay that you find when if you dig a well. The salsal is what you find right before you hit the water, right before you reach water. There's this very, very fine soil. That's the soil that the body is of the Adamite is made of in the Quranic language, and it's that container that the ruh is blown into. So the spirit has a beginning, which is the inblowing, and then it has a journey forward through the different worlds of as that I described previously, but it has no end. It has a beginning but no end, and it's associated in the Quran. Whenever the word comes up, it's always paired with al-amr, the ruh wal amr. The amr is the divine command. It's like you could say the all-encompassing, existentiating command of God that keeps all things in this world in order, and the ruh, the spirit, is like the parallel to it within the the microcosm of the human being. Now, without the body, the ruh could not penetrate into this visible world that we're in. And without the spirit, the body would be a dead corpse. It would be it would be a wouldn't be a jasad. It would be a jutha in the Arabic. It would be a corpse, not a body. And the ruh can only be infused, you could say, or blown into this human body, uh, and not another entity. So you don't have a human ruh, a human spirit that's blown into a cat or a bee or a butterfly or a flower. It can only be blown into this Adamite image. But how is it connected or attached to the body? Is it connected and disconnected at the same time? Uh, eh, that's where the theologians and the Sufis would also say there's a without how, that you can't qualify it. That it's breathed into the body. That's the closest image uh, that one can give to it. It's neither you nor other than you. Uh, the the Quran alludes to this relationship, as Ibn Arabi reminds us often of, one of through the term "wanafakhna fihi," we blew into it. Now, uh, this spirit is characterized by direct perception, unlike the intellect, which has to ratiocinate and reflect. The spirit doesn't do that. Am I not your Lord? Yes, indeed. It's a direct idrak, or a direct perception. Direct knowledge is the property of the spirit. The kind of bookish knowledge that one acquires through study and formal learning and training and that kind of thing is not the the direct knowledge that the Sufis are seeking, the direct perception. And uh, this direct knowledge, idrak, is uh, is the reason for which the human being can be this vicegerent of God on earth, because there's a direct perception of the qualities of God, the names of God, that are taught directly through the inblowing uh, to Adam, and by extension to Adam's children. Let's just put it in those terms. Now, the soul, when you say soul, right now, everything I've said so far sort of revolves around this concept of spirit. I've tried to explain it as, like, you could think of it in terms of a journey from world to world, properties beneath it that, like, your intellect can't actually grasp it. It directly knows through direct perception, through idrak. And the language of the Quranic myths, you could say, or worlds as described in the Hadith and in the Quran, are very helpful in conveying what this ruh is, which is defined as latifa, nuraniya, rabbaniya, mudrika. There's four words that are associated with it. It's latif, as I said. It's subtle. It's nurani. It's luminous. It's of the Lord, Rabbani, and it's mudrik. It's directly. It has direct apprehension. Now, when that spirit, ruh, uh, is, you could say, blown into clay, into the body, that uh, is what gives rise to the nafs, to the soul. Now, the human being has a potential to rise and fall, unlike angels that have a fixed station and no free will, and are made of just light, as per the Quran and the Hadith. وَمَا مِنَّا إِلَّا لَهُ مَقَامٌ مَعْلُومٌ. Each one of us has a known or a fixed station. The human being, in contrast, rises and falls. And this is because the soul is there. It's like this. You can think of it as an isthmus, or a liminal entity between the spirit and the body. When the spirit is placed into the body, there's this changing, fluctuating thing called the nafs that comes to be. And uh, the reality of the human being is in a constant state of fluctuation and of change. By virtue of that, you could say the tension between the demands of the spirit and the demands of the body. The the spirit, ar-ruh, wants to directly apprehend. its nourishment is light, is remembrance of God, is proximity to God, it's divine knowledge. The body needs physical nourishment. It's made of clay. It sort of pulls you down, so to speak. The soul, this nafs, comes out as a result of this union, and it develops gradually as the human body begins to strengthen, as the powers of perception begin to acquire maturity. uh, the nafs begins to also bloom. It begins to also take on these different qualities, and it undergoes 7 stages. As this is the very, very classic schematization of the nafs, of the soul. Now, uh, each newborn, as per the hadith, as per the prophetic saying, is born upon the innate human disposition, right? The the fitra. And then as the body begins to grow, the nafs develops with it, and or the soul develops along with it. And the first property to appear is desire, attachment. A baby smiles when it's content, and screams when it's hungry. And there's you could say an awareness by the nafs of the need for something, but it's not yet a full appetite in the full adult sense of the term. And the nafs gradually, in Islamic spiritual psychology, develops these characteristics until they become, they say, desire for dominion, predatory drives, sexual relations, and so on, until it reaches the age of puberty and religious accountability and prescription of divine commands and prohibitions. And then the divine address once again speaks to it. And so the soul, this nafs, is the locus of accountability. That's where hisab takes place in Islamic language. It's where religious accountability occurs. It's that which is held accountable. And in I mean, broadly speaking, you the lowest, you could say, is the nafsul amara, the nafs, the soul that commands onto evil or is inclined to evil. And this is it's a Quranic term which you would find practically in every Sufi text you open on Islamic psychology. It's the commanding self. uh, if one submits to it, one becomes a slave to its passions. The tricky thing about this nafs is that the body has legitimate needs. It needs to eat to survive. But then the nafs turns the need into an appetite. And that's where it starts playing tricks on the spiritual traveler who's trying to purify the nafs and start understanding things through direct perception through that ruh. So the nafs wants to protect itself, wants to survive, but then let's say the human being wants to survive, but then the instinct can become one of uh, rapacious, violence or whatnot. Now, this nafs amara, this commanding self, is what all the early Sufis were fixated on studying. Muhasibi, the early 9th century figures of the Arab East. Um, Here's a quote on the nafsul amara, this commanding self, this lowest level of human being. It's really not even human being by this point. Like a full blown nafs amara is pretty much sharing the same traits as a rapacious animal. It's the cause of every tribulation. Muhasibi says, a treasure trove of disgrace, the vault of Iblis, Satan, an abode of every evil. When it claims sincerity, it is self conceit and ostentation. You have mercy on it, but it has no mercy on you. It's the deadly adversary within, and its authority must be crushed, and so on. So then, this nafs, we're not talking about the spirit here. We're talking about the properties that emerge from the human being, who's the joining of this ruh and the body, that as it interacts with external variables or stimuli. So the appetites in Islamic psychology, the shahwat, right, sexual intercourse, excess food, Muhasibi lists them as follows: uh, uh, love of sexual intercourse, love of children, love of excess food, of drink, of clothing, and of riding animals, money, and real estate. um, those are like these carnal appetites that Muhasibi, this ninth century, the first theorizer of what the soul is in the early Sufi tradition, he lists them as these external appetites, but there are internal ones that are much harder to deal with, much harder to uproot. So you have these external ones that I've just listed, like love of real estate. You know, with a bit of work, you could probably get over it. But love of leadership, establishment of prestige, attainment of rank, love of good reputation among one's neighbors, and so on. Those are much more subtle ones. They're called the hidden appetites. They're harder to identify. They're concealed within the soul. They're more dangerous, right? Because one can exhibit outward signs of righteousness, but inwardly, every act, every good deed, every act of worship, every attempt at self purification is afflicted by some kind of defect, some selfish interest that taints one's sincerity in one's journey to God. And so these appetites or characteristics of the nafsul amara, the commanding soul, are strengthened by heedlessness, by forgetfulness, by high hopes, all these things that the early Sufis uh, very frequently commented upon. And when you deprive that aspect of yourself of one type of appetite, it'll seek another type of enjoyment. And so uh, there's a very real struggle there for the spiritual traveler, let's say, in attempting to deal with the qualities of this nafs. And uh, there's a lot more to say there. There's if you're familiar with the Aristotelian tradition, the writings of Plato, there's a lot of intersections there and so on. But that's just uh, food for thought. Let's just put it that way. No pun intended. Um, then you have this. If one operates at that level, you just ruin your life and everyone around you. I mean, one nafs can literally destroy a nation. Uh, and the the so that nafs that's purified somewhat becomes a lawama, becomes this reproachful soul. Unlike this blameworthy commanding self onto evil, uh, the reproachful soul is sort of the beginning of the human being. Really, the human being realizes, oh, I can't go around in my vile pursuits. I have to start working on myself. I have to begin. I can't speak to my spouse through my commanding self all day long. Things have to really begin to change. Uh, I have to quit this or that habit. That voice is the voice of the lawama, the voice of the soul that begins to reproach itself. And it should lead to, with proper guidance, to the inspired soul, the nafs al-mulhama, which is the third one. So you go from the commanding to the reproachful to the inspired one. It's like a stage between blaming, self-blame, and the soul at peace. And then the soul at peace is the one that you could say this is the ethical self, the soul that serves as a support to the intellect, that serves as a support to the ascension of the heart, that actually begins to help the traveler in his or her journey to God. This is the soul that begins to understand what tranquility or sakina or itmi'nan really means. Serenity. There's different um, terms for these. And when you enter into writings or conversations in different Sufi orders, uh, often each soul has a specific, or each level of soul, let's say the commanding, the one at peace, so on, they have a specific type of prayer, invocation, practice associated with it to help the wayfarer travel through these different levels. And so then you go from that to the soul, the radiya, to the mardiya, the pleasing soul, the pleased soul, to the perfected soul of the human being. Okay, so all of this that I've tried to describe, these different stages, the seven nufus, these 7 degrees of the soul, are 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 degrees of um, it, they're modalities of the way in which we as human beings interact with other things. So a perfected human being, uh, let's say a Sufi saint, may also engage with uh, the world outside through the 7 messy stages, but most of the time is in the higher levels, is the one at the soul at peace, the tranquil soul, and so on. There is this sort of affirmation that even friends of God have, of course, appetites, and you can't kill the soul. You don't kill it in the full sense of the term. You purify it, but it's the same soul that takes you from divine distance to divine proximity. So if one kills it, that's it. Then one is dead. So it's the thing that accompanies you throughout the journey, let's say. But the point of it is to align it more and more with the demands of the spirit. So that's the basically the whole point, until this inner struggle between the demands of the spirit and the appetites of the soul becomes more aligned. When that occurs, then the intellect begins to function properly. Generally speaking, the Sufis are fairly wary of the reliability of the intellect, because the intellect, the aql, look at Republicans and Democrats. They all marshal all sorts of phenomenal arguments in favor of their positions, but it's one nafs against another, using the same faculty of the intellect to support their positions. They're not in search of truth. They're in search of entrenching their own, let's say, positions, right? So that's a case, let's say, on full display of how the nafs dominates the intellect. It's not that the intellect is in charge. So Sufis are not okay with just relying on the intellect. You can't rationalize your way to God or to sincerity or to divine proximity. You first have to work on the soul, purify it in order for the intellect to actually do its job. Otherwise, I mean, uh, you could, a mundane example would be an argument, right, with one's spouse, and you speak from the nafs, but using your intellect, marshaling every argument you can come up with in defense of your nafs. It's not in defense of the truth, right? You just defending your position. So there, the nafs is dominating, not the intellect, right? So Sufis are not generally, they're not very impressed with the gymnastics that the intellect can do, unless it's purified, unless there's a proper tazkiyah that takes place. So in principle, the intellect is the faculty that discerns between uh, truth and error, the real and the illusory, good and evil, commands and prohibitions, and so on. It's best used, Quranically speaking, when it's used to contemplate the creation of the heavens and the earth. But uh, it's this balance, it's this mizan, and when the lower soul dominates, the intellect will support it. When the spirit dominates, the intellect will support it, and so you'll get these uh, uh, like, how can I put it, morally deficient uh, ethicists, or morally deficient uh, uh, chemists, who are genius chemists, but they're just terrible human beings. Let's say, I'm not giving any specific examples, just like a concrete thing. Like you have a clear contradiction between like this very sharpened intellect and like a deficient human being. And so Sufis, broadly speaking, would use the aql, of course, but it doesn't have direct perception like the ruh. It doesn't have the ability to directly perceive the real, the truth. That's what the ruh does, and to attain that type of knowledge of direct perception, things have to be cleared. The dross has to be cleared. Um, okay, So when you say heart in this context, I'm just going to sum up here. Uh, the heart fluctuates in Arabic, يتقلب, right? So it's like a broader term. It's a useful term to designate like the state that you're in. Qalbun Salim, right? The one who comes to God with a sound heart. That's like, in other words, the soul has been purified, the intellect is working properly, the spirit is apprehending directly, and so on. It tends to be a term it's useful because of the Arabic morphology. That taqallub means to fluctuate, and it captures that tendency of the human being. So Sufi authors will say, purify your heart, or they'll talk about diseases of the heart. They really mean diseases located within the human being's commanding self, the lower self. But it's sort of this broader term. There's a lot of beautiful hadiths on it and beautiful Quranic verses that really kind of capture its uh, its utility, you could say, as an image. And so I'll end here with a quote by a North African author that I'm studying from the 14th century, who writes a manual to explain to his disciples how to journey to God with this tricky nafs that we're all carrying around, that plays all these tricks on us. And he says, uh, as long as the spiritual traveler inclines, I'm quoting here, toward deficiency in his or her states, I call that a nafs. You're operating as a nafs, as soul, and by that he really means the like the lower soul. And the nafs there of the disciple is operating at the station of submission with the outward limbs. In other words, adherence to the law. The heart fluctuates between deficiency and perfection. So unlike the nafs, which sort of like this has a gravitational pull downward pull, the heart is fluctuating. And that's the station of faith. So you're moving from the outward limbs to working on you could say, the deeds of the heart. When the side of perfection dominates over the side of imperfection, so you have the heart is sort of fluctuating. And he says, and the scars are begin to heal. I call that the spirit, the ruh. So here you have a dominance of perfection over imperfection, but still some traces of imperfection. Uh, and then beyond that, you're entering into the sir, which is you need a whole lecture for that, but that's the sir is the so-called secret. It's like the spirit of the spirit. That's the organ of direct perception within the spirit. And he says, but when there's ambiguity in the state of the disciple, I just call it al-batin, or the inward aspect. So uh, in summary, uh, the attitude of the Sufi tradition is that the nafs can be trained. This soul can be trained. It's not that, no, I am the way I am and I can't change this. That's just how things are. That's how the cookie crumbles. That's not how the Sufi tradition looks at it. The soul can be trained. How? Give it less food and more work, basically, like a mule. When it's fed a bit too much and has a stubborn tendency, it won't obey. So the need for a renunciant aspect of one's life is necessary or indispensable in Sufism. Why? Because then the soul is entrenched within the body. So if you weaken the body just a bit, then the soul can begin to ascend, you could say. So that's one point. The renunciant, the emphasis on renunciation within Sufism, in the early but also the later tradition as well, uh, is a result of the fact that the soul is is intertwined or interlocked with the needs of the body. It turns the needs of the body into appetites, and so weaken the body just a bit by fasting, night vigils, focus on prayer, and so on, and you'll begin to strengthen the spirit's hold on it. Um, I think I can leave other key points to the perhaps the Q&A, but uh, I'll end with just a prophetic supplication, a very famous one that the Sufis often invoke. in which the prophet says, "Dear God, I seek shelter in you from incapacity and laziness, senility and cowardice, and miserliness and the punishment of the grave. Dear God, grant my soul, nafsi, its righteousness and purify it, as indeed you are the best of those who purify it. You are its guardian and its master. I seek shelter in you from a heart that has no fear, a soul that cannot be satisfied, a knowledge that has no benefit, and a request that cannot be granted." There's an implication here that divine assistance is necessary in this process of self purification. It doesn't just happen with wishful sort of attitude. It has to occur with work and training, but also divine grace. And in the Sufi tradition, the sine qua non would be a third outside check to the system, which is a Sufi master, one that otherwise you're just um, sh- short circuiting. You're trying to overcome a vice and you keep slipping back into it because there isn't this outside. You're not triangulating the journey to God with an outside teacher. So you can only get so far with self-help books. Let's just put it that way. Okay, uh, I hope that there's some coherence behind the my my points here. We talked about the soul, the intellect, the body, the seven levels of the soul, of the nafs, the spirit, and uh, I'm open to a conversation.